Hey, welcome to Your Own Pathway Therapy Conversations. Here, we confront the systems, conditioning, and professional realities people are taught to normalize, but rarely taught to question. Because eventually, every system reveals what it refuses to confront. So, it's time to own it. So, recently, getting right into this week's episode is recently I gave a presentation introducing my human systems integrity and examining wounded leadership, organizational harm, and the impact systems have on both workers and patient care inside healthcare environments. Excuse me. I'm going to be clearing my throat a lot. And during that conversation, something became increasingly difficult to ignore. Was And the topic was actually brought up by the people that were there. This is for a social work presentation, and of course, most of them or all of them were social workers. And the conversation came about and centered on the quiet, but maybe not so quiet, devaluation of social work itself. Over time, many healthcare and social service systems have slowly started restructuring highly relational and human centered work into lower cost operational roles. And yes, I get it. We understand that systems have budgets. We understand that organizations face financial pressure. But there is also a human cost to how systems choose to reduce those costs. And because one of the many things that many systems fail to recognize is that social work was never only about tasks. From the outside, yes, many people see paperwork. They see us as the person providing resources, referrals, doing discharge planning in hospitals, and doing the coordination, and of course, paperwork documentation. And because the work looks operational from the outside, the assumption becomes, you know what? Anybody can do this. Anybody can do this job. But the invisible part of the work is often the most important part of the work. And this is often the most human part because human centered care requires more than operational management. Social work education was never only about getting a degree. It was preparation for human complexities, the preparation, and that preparation matters. Why? Because one of the things that I have noticed over the years is people entering the positions that previously required social work preparation, only to later realize that they were emotionally unprepared for the intensity of the work itself. Not because they lack compassion, but because compassion alone is not the same as preparation. And I want to clarify that this is not about superior. This is not about, oh, yeah, you know what, social workers, we're superior. Not at all. It's about awareness, it's about responsibility, it's about preparation and accountability. Why? Because we are a licensed profession. And because licensed professions carry accountability structures, that matters. So, moving on, I want to talk about the human consequence of all of this. And a large part of relational professions is not simply just providing services, it is building trust, especially when working with vulnerable, marginalized, overwhelmed, traumatized, or systems fatigue populations. People are not only accepting services, they are placing their trust in another human being. And in helping professions, trust is never a small thing because in long term helping professions, the relationship itself is often part of the care. The rapport matters, the trust matters, the continuity matters, and when that relationship is repeatedly disrupted through either turnover, instability, lack of preparation, or systems inconsistency, rebuilding trust is not always easy. So, a little bit of a story. I've shared my story about being in community mental health. And for those social workers or therapists who are or who have trained in community mental health, you probably can relate a lot to my story. And so I remember working in community mental health and taking over a caseload after another clinician had left. And one client said to me, you're like the second or third therapist I've had in 2 years. And my immediate thought was, oh, this is a lot of therapists. Because for many people, especially in mental health and long term helping systems, starting over is not easy. Why? Because it's hard to retell painful histories and it's hard to rebuild trust. And rebuilding that trust is not easy. So when systems fail to adequately support the professionals responsible for holding that long-term human relationships, eventually the revolving door reaches the clients too. Consumers notice, patients notice, families notice, and people can often sense when something internally is unstable long before leadership fully acknowledges it externally. So, what are the system's consequences? And once trust keeps getting repeatedly disrupted, people start asking, what is happening inside this system that so many people keep leaving? Eventually, the instability stops being internal. Consumers feel it, patients feel it, families feel it. And when that happens, people begin questioning not only the worker, they begin questioning the integrity of the organization itself. Because internal instability eventually becomes external credibility erosion. And once trust in the system itself starts deteriorating, rebuilding that trust is not always easy. So I think we have to address this. This conversation extends beyond social work because we are increasingly seeing relational professions being devalued through operational systems logic. We see this in teaching. We see this in so many helping professions. We see this in caregiving professions. And notice that it's a lot of the female dominated professions. The thing is, invisible relational labor is often mistaken for simple labor. And what systems struggle to quantify operationally, systems often struggle to value. Yes. And that is a deeper systems issue. Systems and organizations increasingly want the quality and the outcomes of relational professions without fully investing in the infrastructure required to sustain them. When systems choose to devalue relational professions through operational cost reduction, eventually the instability begins spreading everywhere else. And ultimately, patients, clients, and families become the ones absorbing the cost. Because eventually leadership starts asking, so why are people quitting? Or why is our retention so poor? Or Why are clients so dissatisfied? I can't talk today. And what are the outcomes? Why are the outcomes so unstable? Without ever fully examining the system's decisions that created the instability in the first place. And unfortunately, many systems do not fully pay attention until patients, until clients, until families begin expressing the impact directly. But by then, the instability has been normalized internally. And this is the contradiction that many systems continue struggling to face. The thing is, systems often seek cheap relief while still expecting the outcomes of deep investment. I recently did a therapy conversations episode called We Train Clinicians, We Don't Train Leaders. And I think that conversation and that video connects deeply to this week's episode because social workers are often not heavily represented at the macro systems level where many of those or these operational and financial decisions are actually being made. Maybe at the meso level, yes, because there's supervisory positions, there's the middle management spaces where advocacy can certainly happen. And yes, meso can definitely advocate, and yet micro determines it. And especially inside secondary systems and organizations, where social workers are often not the dominant voice inside those decision making spaces, like hospitals, schools, which often means that decisions affecting the relational professions are often being made by people who are structurally further removed from the direct human consequences of the work itself. And that distance matters. Why? Because that is often where the misunderstanding and the minimization and the devaluing of relational professions begins. So, what do we do about this? What do we actually do about this? Part of this is structural because we do need more relationally informed leadership inside systems. We need more people with backgrounds in social work, mental health, and relational care, and human behavior to help shape the decisions that are affecting the work self itself. But I also think part of this responsibility belongs to us too, because social workers are incredibly skilled at advocating for everyone else, for clients, for families, for communities, and for systems. But we also need to start advocating more clearly for our own profession. And I feel like I've said this over and over, and I've listened to other people from our field, and they've said that over and over too. Sometimes that advocacy starts simply by speaking honestly about what is happening, naming the patterns, educating people, refusing to normalize the devaluation quietly. Because human systems integrity, HSI, is not only about examining systems, it is also about being willing to confront what systems have also normalized. So, as I close this episode, eventually we have to decide what we are willing to keep normalizing as professionals, as leaders, as organizations, as systems. And as human centered professions, we cannot continue being operationally devalued while still expecting trust, continuity, relational stability with sustainable outcomes. Human centered care requires more than operational management because organizations eventually pay for what they normalize. And someone always absorbs the costs. In this situation, it's often the clients, the patients, and their families. Unfortunately, when it starts impacting the external, that's when systems may start listening and taking feedback. So, that is all I have for this week's therapy conversations episode. And I hope, there's so many more nuances that we can definitely discuss about, but I wanted to come from a systems perspective with this episode. So, again, closing down the episode, and this is your own pathway where we confront the systems, conditioning, and realities people were taught to professionally contain. And you know what? Now it's time to own it. So take care. I will see you all next time. Bye.